Well, good morning, St. Matthew, and all of our Facebook and Instagram and YouTube friends. We are in a week of going with our Red Letter Challenge. Yeah, we're getting close to the end. And there have been a couple of challenges this week that deal with this idea of our testimony. Now, I have to tell you, I kind of cringe a little bit when I hear that word. I went to a Southern Baptist high school where everyone had to have a testimony. And the worse you were before you became a Christian, the better your testimony was. And so I kind of back away from that word. But it's still a great word. And there is, for all of us, these times in our lives where Jesus becomes real. And those stories about Jesus or God becoming real in our lives, those are our testimonies. That's what we testify. And I think back, to a time in my life where God certainly became more real than he had ever been. The summer between my 6th and 7th grade years in school, my parents pulled me out of public school and told me that they were putting me in the Lutheran school. We weren't Lutheran at the time, but there were these kids up the street named the Taylors, and the Taylors were really good kids. And I'm thinking my parents were thinking that maybe if we went to this school where the Taylors went, we would be better kids. Maybe that wasn't their motivation. I don't know. But, I didn't know anything about church schools, but in my mind, I thought that church schools were for sissies. And that summer, we got a telephone call that my teacher was going to come over and meet me, my new 7th grade teacher, and his name was Mr. Gienap. And I thought, Mr.? I had never had a male teacher. And I thought, surely any man that taught at a church school had to be a sissy. And so, he came over, and I was wrong. He was this big, muscular jock with a deep voice. And I thought, this isn't going to be how I thought at all. Well, school started in September. School started in September, and I went to Christ the King Lutheran School in Memphis, Tennessee for the first time. And that week I went to chapel for the very first time. I'd never been to chapel before, but on Wednesdays we had chapel, and I went. And I looked around that church, and I looked at that hard tile floor, and I looked at that heavy red hymnal, and I thought, if I drop this red hymnal on the floor, that would make a lot of noise, and that would be kind of funny. And if I did it at a time when everybody was really quiet, like during the prayer, that would be even more funny. And so that's what I planned to do. And I had that heavy red hymnal in my hand. And I was sitting on the end of the pew, at the center aisle, and right across the aisle and a couple rows in front, Mr. Gienap was sitting. And right as I let go of that hymnal to drop it on that hard tile floor, make a lot of noise, in the prayer, Mr. Gienap turned around and he saw me. And my first thought was not, aren't you supposed to have your eyes closed during the prayer? My first thought was, man, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. Because, in those days, the late 60s and 70s, when you got in trouble at school, that meant you got taken out in the hall and the teacher paddled you. And I'd been paddled lots of times, but never by a big jock man with big muscles. And I thought, man, this is really going to hurt. And after chapel, there he was. Bill, come here. I'm going to get it. And I looked in his eyes, and they were hurt. And he said, when you go home tonight, I hope you'll pray for God to forgive you for misbehaving in his house. And again, my first thought was, man, I got off scot-free. My first thought was, I've hurt this big jock guy by misbehaving in God's house. And what that said to me was, for him, this God was real. This God was someone, who was watching us, who cared about what we did, who got offended by what we did. And I didn't wait till I got home. After chapel came recess, and I went out behind the air conditioners at recess, and I prayed for the very first time in a heartfelt way for God to forgive me for misbehaving in his house. And I think about that. Now, that was 1974. It's now 2020. That was a long time ago. But I kind of point to that place as the place where God, for the first time, really became real to me. Something I really wanted to think about, something I wanted as part of my life. I know you have stories too. And I would love to hear those stories. In fact, I challenge you to videotape your story of how God became real in your life. And let us put it on our Facebook page. Let us put it on our Instagram page. It would be a great story for your brothers and sisters in Christ to hear. It'd be a great story for people outside the kingdom to hear, so that God can become real in their lives as well. Have a great week.